You may have already heard about the fabulous New York Times rent versus buy calculator that came out in May, but if not, I want to talk about it again because it's just that fabulous. When you first get to the tool, you'll see a colored green box in the top right. This is the amount of rent that if you can rent below that, that makes it better off for you to rent than buy. And this number will change as you manipulate the different variables on the actual online tool. So let's work through a bit of an example. So first of all, we start with the house price. Let's use a house that costs $605,000. Second of all, they ask you how long do you stay? And this is important because those upfront costs that you're gonna spend just to buy the house will get spread over a longer period of time if you're planning to stay there for 20 years versus 2 years. So basically, the longer that you're gonna stay put in that house, the more of an argument it is to buy. Let's say that we decide to stay in this house for 10 years. Next, you're gonna have to know about mortgage details, and this can be an area where people don't always necessarily know where to go for that kind of information. First things first, you're looking for a mortgage rate. A great quick way to get that is to go to some sort of online rate aggregator like lowestrates.ca, and you can see what the current lowest rates are being offered out there, so it'll give you some jumping off point that you can answer that question. So let's use 2.84% for our mortgage right now in this example. Now, if any of you have watched my video on can you afford a down payment, you'll know that we always want to aim for 20%. I'm going to keep this at 20% because that means that you wouldn't be considered a high ratio mortgage and have to pay extra fees. And then lastly, the amortization period, which is basically how long are you going to have your mortgage for? And let's say 25 years. So the next part can be really tricky if you're not really sure what information goes in there. So they're talking about house price growth, the rate of rent growth, what you think your investments could make in the stock market, and also inflation. So there's default answers that are input into the tool, which I think are fairly realistic. I'm going to use most of them. Now those variables might change year to year, but generally if you Google the question, what's the rate of inflation? Or what do I think the housing market in my city is going to look like? You can probably find those answers just by doing a simple Google search. And next is the amount of tax that you personally pay on your income and your tax rate. And you can find that out by looking at last year's tax summary and basically see how much you paid over how much you made. And whatever that percentage is what your marginal tax rate is. The closing cost section is important because it talks about the closing costs if you're buying or if you're selling the house, which is important because remember we said we were only staying here for 10 years. So we need to factor in the next stuff that we're going to have to pay for later on by selling the home. So buying costs are usually a little bit less than the selling costs because you don't have to pay for the realtor commission. So for buying costs, I usually assume about 2.5%. And that's 2.5% of the whole amount of the house. But for closing costs, I would usually assume 6% because you're gonna have your commissions in there. And also, this is another thing to Google, you might have something called land transfer tax if you're selling the house, and that can be very high, and that can surprise a lot of people. So make sure that you Google that, is there a land transfer tax in your local area, and see what that percentage would be and tack it on. Okay, so next we just have to estimate some things about the house that we're gonna buy. And again, usually this information will be posted somewhere on a listing if you've got a listing for the house that you're looking to purchase. But these are also things that you can kind of estimate. So things like your maintenance and renovation, I would usually say 1% every single year of the value of your house is likely going to cost you just to stop a leaking pipe. So for our example, I'm going to use 1% for maintenance and repair, 0.46% for the homeowner's insurance. I'm going to use $300 for monthly utilities, and I'm not going to add any condo fees. Now we're going to talk about what happens to you if you rent indefinitely. So we need to know what's the security deposit. Usually this is first and last month's rent, so we're going to put 2 months. And then we also have to see if there's a brokerage fee. So if you found your rental place with a broker, you'd have to put that in. I'm going to assume 0. And then we also need the renter's insurance, and I'm going to assume about 1% for that. And like I said before, if you look at the top right, in that green box, that's the rent, that if you can rent cheaper than that, it's actually a better financial decision for you to rent instead of buy. And that's a factor of all of those different variables worked out over a long period of time, which gives you more bang for your buck. If you're disappointed with the answer there, that's okay. What I would suggest is moving around some of the variables like the housing price, your down payment, that kind of thing, those ones that'll have a big effect. And that's where you can kind of see that rough price point where it would make buying actually a better financial decision than renting. So have some fun with this tool. Like I said, the link is below. I think it gives you unbelievable access to information and a really, really instant check-in to see if you should be buying or if renting is actually okay. So if you're all motivated and jazzed up that it's actually a good financial decision for you to buy, make sure that you watch my series on Can You Afford to Buy a House? The link is below because I don't want to see anybody being house poor. And don't forget to subscribe.